where you continually feel invisible or diminished. But then upon doing something that is perceived as novel or unconventional, you are then presented with a layer of merit or treated as an exception of the rule, despite all the negative and harmful stereotypes and tropes that were already presuppositions against you coming into a world where you knew none the wiser. And I think that's pretty sinister.
What's up, cousins, and welcome back again on another episode today. How are you all doing? I hope you guys are doing great. And if you're joining for the very first time, thank you so much for being here. I came across a video of a creator on TikTok talking about how Black people are not always seen unless they are talking about something intellectual. Like, if you're not being a social activist, if you're not talking about racism, if you're not speaking on social issues, and it's just something that is very, very common in the Black community. Like, they can only be recognized when they are being a social activist. And this man said it in the best way possible. And I want you to see it because I believe people have other interests and people have other things that they want to share. And it's just like the people who are seen are just people who talk about social issues. And we all know that not every Black person is going to talk about social issues. So without wasting much time, let me just roll the clip so that you guys can hear from the horse's mouth.
Black people are really not respected intellectually unless they're talking about racism, sexism, some sort of social dynamic or social construct. I've been on TikTok for about a year and a half, like posting heavily, like actually posting stuff. And one thing that I've noticed is that there is seldom a Black creator that is able to build a large platform, a large following, have people listen to and respect what they say. If it is about something that we could classify as intellectual, big air quotes, because I don't really like that terminology. But think about every Black creator that you can think of that has a big platform. What do they talk about? If it's not sports or comedy or entertainment or something like that, if it's a platform where they have built the reputation to be respected intellectually for the things that they say, overwhelmingly, the only time that can happen is if what they're talking about is social dynamics. I'm not saying that there aren't Black creators that have platforms where they speak about other things that are intellectual, where they show and are respected for their intelligence. I'm just saying that they don't have huge platforms. I follow a lot of them on here. I'm friends with a lot of them. And I'm definitely not saying that anybody who's talking about any sort of social dynamics, I'm not shitting on that at all. But what I am saying is that it's bothersome that the space for Black people to be seen as intelligent is limited to damn near one topic. And maybe you disagree with me, but to me, this is an observation that's overwhelmingly true. There are, of course, exceptions, but it is rare. It is extremely rare for a Black person to be able to build their reputation as intelligent, as some sort of intellectual, unless they are talking about social dynamics or social constructs. And with that being said, ironically, one of the few examples where we constantly see the exception coming true is when you have a Black creator who actively and constantly makes their entire platform about speaking out against Black people who do speak about those things. I'm talking about your Candace Owenses. I'm talking about those other weirdos. I don't know their names. Those other weirdos on here who just absolutely hate Black people. There's a couple Black dudes that they just fucking hate Black people's guts. And they're constantly putting out this like anti-Black shit. And they can grow big platforms. But the support that they have is coming from like white people who hate hearing about race and that sort of thing. And so to summarize, if you're Black, you can really only be respected intellectually by a lot of people, enough to say that you have a huge platform if you're talking about social dynamics or if you are shitting on the Black people who do that. Isn't that crazy? I'm sorry, that's nuts to me.
What do you guys think about his observation, and what do you think about the example he gave? To a certain extent, I kind of agree with him, and there is another creator who stitched his video who went more in depth about what he is talking about. So let me just roll the clip of what he has to say before we come back and talk about it.
Black people are really not respected intellectually unless they're talking about...
This video is incredible, and I pretty much agree with everything that Dakota is saying. You honestly should go back and watch the full thing because it is just full of a richness of information around a tremendous issue regarding the appropriate amount of celebration and respect for the intellectual celebration around Black people and our diverse mindsets and the way that we approach the world and the way that we perceive the world as we navigate through it. I love listening to Dakota's comments so much that I wanted to add on to this because I think I actually have some insight to contribute, especially necessarily as a Black person, but an ADHD and autistic person as well, but also somebody who also functions within the confines of science, but not just any science, natural resources, which if anybody who is also a mutual in the field of conservation biology or wildlife biology is a incredibly oversaturated environment full of white individuals, but also incredibly white men. And when you consider the history of where it comes from, as women were often sometimes excluded from participating in it as well. But I also study specifically ecology as well. If anybody knows anything about ecology not only has some incredibly racist roots in histories as well, but the lack of representation for Black people in ecology. I mean, you can go on Google right now and type in Black ecologists, and it generally, you won't really get anything if you try to pull it up. What you get is environmental justice scholars, which is kind of the point that Dakota is making. However, one of the things I wanted to contribute to this conversation that I thought would be interesting to add on to this is Dakota is right that Black people generally tend to be celebrated more for their intellectual contributions and expertise around the areas of forms of like sociology, racism, and those forms of humanities studies, and things like environmental justice and environmental justice scholarship. But I've also noticed, if you think about it, Black people are also incredibly, intellectually typecasted, if you want to use that type of language, in two major categories, which I find to be really music and sports, in the ways people are celebrated for their music genius or creative, prowess in forms of athletic discipline. And I think that in some ways actually has a tremendous impact on society in the ways young Black children grow up and see forms of representation in the different types of fields and avenues that they can pursue as they get older. Now, what I want to talk about, and something that I feel like I don't hear enough people talk about, especially within the Black community, is something I refer to as the novelty of unconventional Blackness theory. And I'll explain what this means. I find it absolutely fascinating how differently people in society will treat a Black person based on the novelty or perceived novelties or unconventionality of their interests. Outside of all the negative stigmas and tropes and just general forms of racism that I've experienced, I cannot tell you the number of times I've been congratulated or applauded or treated differently when I've told people that I am a scientist or I am an ecologist or I do what is perceived as novel or unconventional things in comparison to what people expect of Black people. I remember having a conversation with the guy when I was doing research in Nevada, and I remember I was telling him, I was like, I'm not really different from you. I was like, we both like science. I was like, we both like wildlife. We're both, in ecology. I was like, I just happen to be Black. And he was like, that does make you special. And I think that statement in itself, while his attempt was to be flattering, I think really nails down the idea of how white people perceive Black people and what they expect of us when it comes to particular forms of interests or the ways in which we exude talents, but also the ways in which we pursue particular types of avenues when it comes to careers and the spaces in which we reside in. But also it shows a clear amount of awareness of the lack of representation when it comes to the sciences and the fact that by participating in something that inherently makes it novel, or us, ourselves novel by participating in these underrepresented fields. I very much find the experience of being Black as constantly having to justify your existence in a reality where you continually feel invisible or diminished, but then upon doing something that is perceived as novel or unconventional, you are then presented with a layer of merit or treated as an exception of the rule, despite all the negative and harmful stereotypes and tropes that were already presuppositions against you coming into a world where you knew none the wiser. And I think that's pretty sinister.
I love the contribution of the second stitch to the original video. I love how it further explained everything and it made so much sense. Not everybody wants to consume content about social issue, if we're being totally honest. Not everybody wants to come online to be a social activist. Some people just want to, do other things, and when they start doing those things, they start seeing them as being special, almost like they are not allowed to be someone else. That's just how I see it. This comment said, sometimes I am simply exhausted of hearing about social issues. It can be draining. If you are, especially if you're on the part of, learning more and more on history and the things that have happened, because a lot of us, school actually failed us when it comes to history, and we just have to learn on our own. I've learned so much. I always say I've learned so much on TikTok, and that is just the absolute truth, because a lot of things that I have had, I've never been told in school. I've never been taught in school before. Another person said, the amount of times I have said something in class, only for my peers to look at me confused, or repeat it as their own idea, shake my head. And when it is confirmed that I am right and knowledgeable, it just gets brushed under the rug like it is one-off thing. It can really be draining. As someone who come across content on social issues almost every single day, I can assure you that it is actually draining. Another person said, now I agree with you. When I make posts about science or engineering or philosophy, it doesn't get near the reach as one of on social issues. So it doesn't get across to a lot of people unless it's talking about social issues. They can't believe it when you're in the same space as them and you're excelling. It is so funny to watch. Last one I have here said, I experienced this in becoming a writer. The past recent years, people are astonished that I am not a social activist. Let me know your thoughts about this in the comment section. Thank you all so much for joining. Please subscribe before you go and turn your bell notification on, and I'll see you guys in the next one.